Well, it sounds very enterprising. So, so what topic? Are there any topics that you wanted to talk about in regards to all this sort of truth? Because
Well,
the
I'm
show
actually
makes.
going to be taking an aeroplane from
Yeah.
Auschwitz to Israel. I'd just like to talk about. I'm concerned. I'm concerned about jet fuel because I know this jet fuel is highly flammable. It destroyed the entire World Trade Center. So
Yeah.
I'm just worried. Is it safe? And how do these aircraft operate?
Well, I live in Southeast Asia, and sometimes we see these small lizards that crawl around on the walls, and I keep a long way away from them because I know that these lizards, being descended from dinosaurs, are probably very flammable. And because I'm a
Yeah.
smoker, I'm always worried that one of them could just ignite, and that there could be a huge ball of flame fills my entire room. Because these lizards are very flammable, and so that's why they form very flammable crude oil, including what's it called? Kerosene. What's the one they use for aeroplanes? That fraction is called. Is it kerosene that they use for
I
air?
believe so.
I can't remember. It's some name they
It's
give it.
a
But
unnamed.
that's only the most flammable dinosaurs can make jet fuel. It takes about the recipe. I think it takes 47 million years, and you need certain small dinosaurs, certain species.
You need a mixture of triceratops. To make the jet fuel, you need a mixture of triceratops mixed with T-Rex,
Yeah,
mixed with with just some of these smaller lizards. The Velociraptor. See, these lizards are the ones that you need to create
yeah,
the better fuel. People would actually think you would want pterodactyl, but
yeah.
pterodactyl is not what you want in your jet fuel.
I can see the pterodactyl is good for gliding and staying at high altitude, but I can see why you'd want a bit of velociraptor. Like if I was flying an F-35, I can imagine that you'd want maybe one tank full of molten velociraptor, and you could have a button like an afterburner button and just inject the velociraptor into the when the flame comes out the back of the nose. You know an
Yes.
afterburner that you know afterburner the F-14 Tomcat with the flick wings. Yeah,
Oh yes, yes.
because
Top Gun.
yeah, it used. I don't know if you remember. They tried to maybe make us forget, but they used to tell us that the F-14 Tomcat, which can take off from a aircraft carrier and land with a wire on a hook, also has sweet flick wings, so it could go. The wings could go forwards and backwards, and it had afterburners, which meant that you could inject a certain special kind of nitro fuel into the into the flaming jet at the back, and it would kind of blast out, and you'd go super fast. And I can imagine that's what you'd use Velociraptor juice for.
That's
Is when
right.
you
Yes.
really like, if you got, for example, if I had an AIM 9X Sidewinder missile closing on me about half a kilometre behind me, and um, I deployed my metal chaff out the back, and that hadn't
Yes.
worked, and it was about to hit me and kill me, then
Yeah.
I would hit the Velociraptor button, and bam, I would like go to. It would basically be like warp drive.
That's absolutely correct. That's what I was about to
It would be
say.
like a
Just like the Millennium Falcon.
jump to hyperspace,
That's right.
and the Sidewinder, because it only had a range of a few miles, would just fall into the sea and never be found again.
Yes. Yeah, you just
Um,
have to be careful when you're traveling at those speeds that you're constantly descending or ascending to match the curvature of the spinning, wobbling ball Earth.
yes.
Yes.
That's one of the dangers with the Velociraptor is you could go so fast you could just go flying out. You could just go to escape velocity and find yourself in geostationary orbit or even beyond. In fact,
That's right.
you could
Eventually,
collide
you
with
would just sort of pop out of the non-vacuum of the Earth and into the vacuum of space.
yeah, and you probably hit all the debris and the Van Allen belt, and you probably have a hole punched through your head. You know, like in that uh, Gravity film where the thing punches a big hole through his face. You know, the debris
Yes.
flying.
Yes. Yeah.
That you could have that, which wouldn't be great. But then you're dead, so not really such an issue, I guess.
No, not at all.
And also, it's not like you need any more publicity shots. You've got those Ayn Rand photos. You don't need any new ones. So I guess it's not such a big problem. But those jets, yeah, I don't know about them. There are other jets that don't use molten dinosaur. I suspect that actually use the electrical charge and the air to.
Oh yes. What's this one about?
Well, you know how you get those trails out the back of the planes.
Yeah, wow, it's Jones's chemtrails, the barium, the aluminum, the microbiological particle.
Exactly.
It's gonna eat you.
Exactly. Those chemtrails. Yes. Well, those trails that come out the back of the plane. What are they? What do you think they are?
Well, some crazy kooky people have speculated they could be condensation, but it has to be the barium and the aluminum and what are the little tiny computer things that they've got? What do they call that? The little bullshit, that made up shit.
No, not titanium.
Nanobots.
Graphene?
Yeah, graphene nanobots. How about that?
Graphene nanobot. What you spray
that
particles?
Sounds like bullshit.
Yeah. Particulate sprays of nanobots made of graphene.
Yeah, cool. They'll believe that. Fuck it, they'll believe anything.
When I say things like that, I start to think, wow, this really is like the other channels.
It really is.
We're not so different, to the other channels. So these sprays of particulate nano technology, grey goo, ooze, those things. I lost my train of thought. Yeah, no, it was all bollocks, wasn't it?
Yeah, we're just making Jew shit up, mate.
These trails out the back of planes, okay, you know how they look like cloud? They look like cloud.
Yes.
And then they float to the clouds, and then they just sort of gradually expand, just become cloud.
Into cloud, that's correct, yes.
So you could, instead of using all these terminology like barium and lithium and whatever, instead you could just chuck all that away and say it's cloud, couldn't you? Because it's the same thing as cloud. You can just see that. I mean, if you didn't have any other advanced information given to you about what it was, it would just look like cloud.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, from a common sense point of view, that would make perfect sense. But as we know, it's nanobots and barium and aluminum and a whole bunch of stuff that
Here's something I don't understand about the chemtrails crowd. Is that the people who are always banging on about chemtrails and how worried they are, and they're always posting stuff and they're trolling.
Like Alan cutting through the matrix.
There's so many of them. They troll me the whole time saying chemtrails are real, But those people never seem to ever talk about the other forms of poisoning that are going on. For example, the poisoning of the water supply and the poisoning of the food supply. So they're always banging on about the poisoning of the air. Which is, although if it was true, it would be very controversial. It's like a bit more. It's not as straightforward, is it, as the poisoning of the food and the water? But that doesn't seem to worry them. So they're not. I don't know why they would focus their priority on chemtrails and the air being poisoned and not be worried about the fluoride.
You do get a localized poisoning around certain kinds of factories that are built, certain chemical plants, say one where you may develop a compound of fluorine and fluoride. You certainly will get a localized poisoning in the air, which can travel, absolutely. I mean, people there would get very, very, very unwell. But fortunately, they've managed to put fluoride in the drinking water, so now that's all good.
Yeah, so they made sure it's not in the air, and they put it in your drinking water.
That's right. Yeah. So it's absolutely not in the air, but it's definitely in the drinking water. Yes.
So how can this is my question. How can anyone take any of these chemtrails people seriously when the people who express concern about chemtrails don't express concern about other forms of poisoning that are definitely real. So they're not controversial. It's not controversial that there is fluoride added to the water supply, and yet they don't focus on that. They focus on chemtrails, and it isn't. We're being poisoned in our food supply as well with all kinds of horrible shit, and it is anyway, designed to be very toxic, like very fatty, very, to make us all kind of ill and poorly functioning and weak, and then they can tell us we've got terminal disease.
As the great Sir Bertrand Russell would say, through diet and injection and injunction, basically we can turn everybody into pretty much the equivalent of a room full of children with various health and mental impairments, and so then it's quite easy to go in there and just kick everybody's ass. They're very unwell.
Yep, that's true.
What? Look.
Every time the plane banked too sharply on takeoff or landing, I prayed for a crash or a mid-air collision. Anything. Life insurance pays off triple if you die on a business trip.
But it's kind of fun as well. It's even more fun to think that we're going to have the last laugh, and that the real... that they really are going to burn down in their own fucking cinema.
Don't touch me! Don't touch me! Get up! Let him up!
If they need security, you want me to take care of this? No, it's all right. You'll be all right.
You gotta let this play.
Just sure.
You gotta get the outside. You gotta get outside. You gotta let this play.
Sit down. Everybody sit down. Sit down. Get in your seat. I want all the passengers in their seats.
You gotta get this outside.
Yes, thank you very much.
You gotta get this okay. Find this thing out. Get this thing out. You gotta get this thing out.
You know where you are.
Yes. Valentine. Get us on the ground.
Relax.
Here, little girl. Okay. Come on, darling.
That's it. Relax. Come on, honey. You belong over here. Ah, that girl. That's it. Just take a couple deep breaths. Everything's gonna be okay.
God, what has she done this time?
Yeah, it's fine, Maxie. Give it some more. Max! Max! Max!
Holy Toledo! Hey, you guys! What happened up there?
That's enough of that noise, huh? Who needs it anyway? How about a little music? Sure.
Left the midnight special.
Hey, that's... I love Creedence. So you had a big scare up there, huh? Oh, yeah. Want to see something really scary?
There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
The slave liners for these cylinders being put together. I think it's around 11 here. These women are working on the actual the superchargers, and you can see the spirals on the actual bit that goes towards the nose cone bit. This is the engines being assembled here. But you've got to bear in mind, this was back, there it is. I mean, it's a beautiful piece of engineering. This was going back in the Second World War when they were on rations, and you had the, you know, you've seen the films. It's as though we were in the Dark Ages, and yet here, I'm telling you, these engines run on air. So they've invented free energy generators, okay? and they're just dumbing it down and saying, oh yes, this is where the test bed is here. What they're doing is they're putting them in here, then they put them up to run for about 4 hours, and then while they're hooked up, they connect them to these generators, and they save the plant £25,000 or sorry, dollars a month by connecting them up and running them up. But this is just their way of saying these engines power these generators, so they have smaller versions of these all around cities, towns. It's always been this way. GE Electric were also one of the first to develop the gas turbine engine because they invented electricity. It goes hand in hand. But yeah, they just said they pre-oiled the engine, then they rolled it into the test bed. And here they are. They've got it on test. They're checking, the airflow and temperature and the oil temperature. I mean, it's very important. You don't want it to overheat and stuff. Then after the 4-hour test, they strip it down, check it's okay, and put it back together again. But the films like Back to the Future, I've said to you, it's like we've been living in the past, but we're really in the future. I don't know how they've done it, but they've made it. We've been living with free energy for years, and yet you wouldn't know. Anyway, the more I look at this stuff, the more it blows my mind. And here's the plastic. They're actually vacuum packing this thing. So they had vacuum packed plastic technology back in the Second World War. Hey, that's sucking the air out of it to vacuum seal this thing. But what just astounds me is they had all this, and yet you look at your modern car, they can put all the blooming sat-nav and whatever they like on it, but you still have to put diesel in it. You still have to put petrol in it. So it doesn't matter what they do to that engine, it will always have the same emissions. So what I'm saying is, well, what I was going to say is the size of this plant. Look, it's not just the building of the 13,000 parts, it's all of this machinery. You try and build a factory, get the engineers to plan it all out, to get all the machines that build all the machines, to build the parts, get it all together, and then to do that in such a short period of time, and then produce the thousands of engines that they were producing every month. It's almost like it was planned well in advance. And you can call me a conspiratorial person if you like, but it's only when you go back and look at the marvellous engineering here, and bear in mind they weren't using CNC machines and computers back then. It was just automated hand job by hand and all the rest of it. Anyway, I'll leave it there. It's a fascinating little archive footage there. Please give it a look. Anyway, I'll leave it there. That'll do. Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, what do? Should I brace myself? Should I relax? Should I lean in?
It's a 747 coming at you.
Yeah.
You could wiggle your ears and clap your Tinkerbell and it wouldn't make any difference.
Okay.
Don't you get it?
I think so. The attempt to hold on to sanity too tight is insane.
What?
To gain control, you gotta lose control, right?
I can't hear you!
What was that you were saying?
Wreckage below? The motor the one on main? No. Let's go this way, over. Think you got out? I didn't see a shoot. Record his position. Then set heading 128, 1000 over. Vector 128, injured 1, understood. Officer, what's your fuel? 50 gallons, over. 50 gallons. Alright, keep letting me know. In case it would have enough out of that. You keep that packed? No. I'm fairly confident it's just a case.
Now that's about, I make that out about 220 odd litres, something like that, which, as I've shown you in many videos, that's a massive cylinder full of water, about the size of a 5.5 foot bloke. So where the hell is this fuel tank? It's not in the wings are tiny, we've done a video on that. It's just Hollywood's way of keeping the lie going.
Sheer amount of destruction. Survivors. Oops. Clamor to keep the plane from rapidly losing altitude. The pilots dump fuel and at one point turn the entire plane upside down to help mitigate its downward projection.
We're gonna roll it, okay?
What do you mean roll it?
We gotta do something to stop this dive.
Eventually, they crash land, but not before they take off a church steeple. Avoids being sucked into an engine.
So apparently they said they're going to be refueling, but just how, when, where and why is a good question, and how many gallons are required. So yeah, the whole refueling, more like it, because you know, that's just air, it's gas.
Talk about gas turbines now, because gas turbines are gas. The main component used to generate power in a gas turbine are a compressor, a combustor, and a gas turbine.
Yeah.
Because they can be started up quickly. Gas turbines are ideal for engines on aircraft. Oh man, look at this gas turbine. Isn't that the exact same picture as the jet engine?
Your aeroplanes are free energy.
Tremendous static charges can build up on a flying plane. An uncharged plane taxiing across a dry concrete or blacktop runway can accumulate a charge. Refueling crews are well aware of the hazards of static electricity. That's why they first ground the truck. Then the truck is bonded to the plane. Finally, the nozzle is bonded to the plane before opening the cap of the tank. Lightning is nature's greatest manifestation of static electricity. It is generated, of course, by contact and separation, or by rupture and separation of raindrops during violently turbulent conditions. As charged raindrops fall to Earth, they leave one charge in the cloud or atmosphere and bring an opposite charge to Earth. After enough raindrops have fallen, the difference of potential between Earth and the cloud becomes great enough to cause a stroke of lightning. Lightning can discharge from a cloud to Earth, from Earth to a cloud, or from cloud to cloud.
Yeah, well, yeah, they've just really been scamming you guys all along. This is why this information is just everywhere now. Because that's why I said Aaron's impatient, man.
Yeah, your aeroplanes run on air because they are using air compression engines.
Gas turbines are comprised of a compressor, combustor, and a turbine. These components work together to produce power or thrust. The propulsive force of a jet or rocket engine, depending on the application. You can use them for different things, but this is what they use.
In this video, we'll talk about how gliders fly and introduce the basic principles of flight. You've almost certainly been lied to about how planes fly. You may have seen this diagram of the 4 forces required for flight. But in a glider, there's no engine and therefore no thrust. And this diagram is clearly wrong because the forces don't balance. Imagine someone on a skateboard. Here, the weight of the skateboarder is counteracted by the reaction from the ground, but the drag or air resistance will gradually reduce the speed until the skateboarder stops. Now imagine a skateboarder on a slope. As before, the weight is acting vertically down, the drag is acting in the opposite direction to motion, and the reaction force is perpendicular to the surface. If we resolve these forces parallel and perpendicular to the direction of motion, we can see that part of the weight is pulling the skateboarder downhill and overcoming the drag. Therefore, the skateboarder is able to maintain a constant speed as long as he continues on the same slope. A similar concept applies to a glider, where it must always fly slightly downhill, trading off height to maintain speed. And here we can see the balanced 3 forces acting on the glider. If the glider is always going slightly downhill, we can define the glide ratio as the distance forward the glider can fly for each unit of height lost. One of the features that sets gliders apart from other aircraft is that they have much higher glide ratios, and therefore they can travel much further for each unit of height loss. But how is the lift generated? Well, the wings of a glider work exactly the same way as any other aircraft, but how wings work is often explained so poorly that it becomes factually incorrect. The true explanation of lift is that it is the consequence of solving the Navier-Stokes equations for a fluid flowing over an aerofoil. But as you can see, these equations are quite complex. For a simplified explanation, imagine some air flowing from right to left. The lines here, called streamlines, represent the motion of the air. Now we've inserted an object into the airflow. In a perfectly frictionless world, the airflow would wrap round the object and return to its original course. To make the airflow turn, there must have been a force acting on it. This force comes from a pressure gradient, with the lower pressure on the inside of the turn and the higher pressure on the outside of the turn. Therefore, around the object there must be areas of low and high pressure. Now imagine a thin, flat plate in the airflow. When it's perfectly parallel to the airflow, the air goes around it with no effect. If we rotate the plate, we call the angle between the airflow and the plate the angle of attack. Introducing an angle of attack forces the streamlines to curve around the plate. This creates an area of low pressure above the plate and a small area of high pressure below the plate. This pressure difference creates lift. Increasing the angle of attack forces the streamlines to curve more, increasing the pressure difference and thus increasing the lift. In the real world, with friction, the streamlines are not able to turn tightly enough to flow round all shapes. This results in flow separation. When the flow separates, the area of low pressure above the wing is significantly reduced, and therefore the lift is also significantly reduced. This is known as the stall. Most aircraft don't have flat plate wings. That is because the aerofoil is a better designed flat plate, which for the same angle of attack will give you more lift, less drag, and has a nicer control of the stall characteristics. The increased thickness allows you to put structural elements in, which support the wing.
survey is real or not. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? These people are never going to turn around and say, hey, did you know that they promote trannies as the beautiful women in the media? What kind of Jew Freemason fucking trick is that, you know? Like, yeah, it's trick, it's trap, it's like $1. Dollar man, $6 million, dollar man. You really got to do something with that, Aaron. If you can get past that one block and be like, oh shit, it's not just Zios and Jews, they've got this weird tranny agenda too. If you could get that bit, Jungle Surfer could get onto your stuff a bit, we might actually have some sort of formidable, entertaining, and yet intelligent course of action. Because, you know, you guys just have to face it. People are fucking stupid.